So there it is, the last of the Picassos. And it's really interesting because I was looking at it and I was reading more and more on his last years, which is really not a pretty picture, by the way. And I'm saying I'm probably happy that it's over. But anyway, I think it was an interesting series. And let me get my pointer just in case. There we are. Not yet. Okay. So we are now going to talk about Picasso after the Second World War. And just to see, why doesn't it want to work? Doesn't want to work. Why is that? Doesn't want to work. That's interesting. Okay, so I'll do it by hand. Frozen. There we are. Let's see if it works. There we are. So after the Second World War, you can see that Picasso, as we had mentioned, had adhered to the Communist Party, and that was very much a reaction against fascism. There's absolutely no doubt there. He was so angry about what had happened. And for him, it's not what you would call a political statement. It's mostly a, yeah. Come in, come in. It's mostly that kind of reaction to fascism, as I say. Many of the content of the Communist manifesto and so on were nothing important to him. But it was that idea of being anti-war. And very much he hated the war, he hated the results of the war. So that was what he wanted to do. And we see, for example, in France, a lot of people contemporary to Picasso did the same thing. For example, Yves Montand, if you know Yves Montand, who was a very famous singer in France, but also an actor, also adhered to the Communist Party. But both Picasso and him were millionaires and were, going around in beautiful cars and had a very high level, of life standard. But it had nothing to do with, if you want, having everybody on the same level or whatever. Some of it would be part of it, but it was mostly a reaction to that time. What you can see here is the Front National Universitaire. So it's the National Front of the university. National Front is equivalent to the Communist Party, and you can see that Picasso is on the front line of that manifestation. And he was the star. Picasso, by that time, had a real status of star in France and in many other countries. As we discussed, why doesn't that thing want to move? Anyway, as we discussed, he was at that time with Françoise Gillot. He had been with her since the beginning of the war. And by 1951, when he celebrates his 30th birthday, there she is. Though they've had 2 children together, and he was extremely difficult. She said later on that it was never really love, but they had a lot of discussion on art and on life together. So that was really the common point with them. But of course, he was quite a bit older, and he must have been in many ways a fascinating person. But in other ways, he was a very ugly figure too. When, by the way, around by 1951, the situation was really degrading between the two of them. A lot of people, friends of both, were telling Françoise to leave him because he'd become so, at the same time, possessive, but also destructive, as we have seen with other women before Françoise. And he would go through her stuff and destroy a lot of her stuff. She had letters that she really cared for from Matisse, for example, from Henri Matisse, and he destroyed them. So really a very strange attitude, so much so that after she left him, she literally tried to sue him and tell that he was insane because he had some attitudes that were so bizarre. Something is wrong with this computer. I don't know why. An interesting figure in Picasso's later life is this Inès Sassier, who was a Picasso housekeeper from the time of de Hamar. And here you see that picture by de Hamar of Inès Sassier. They were two sisters, and then this one decided to take care of Picasso and literally took care of him to his last days. Followed him, went through his moments of anger and angst, but she was also a confidant. He liked her. She got married, had a child, and he always arranged for her to have an apartment or a facility to live in close by to him. As you can see, she was a pretty girl. And he actually painted her and gave her many of the portraits. So she made a fortune selling the works after he died, at least the ones she wanted to sell. In 1946, Picasso, who loved the Mediterranean, was in Golfe Juan with his friend Louis IV, and decided to go and visit a pottery exhibition in Vallauris, which is not very far, and discovered that lovely town where you had many workshops for ceramic making. So he was invited in the Madura pottery, you can see there on the right, with Suzanne Hamier. There was a couple that owned that ceramic, the kiln and the whole facility. And Suzanne talked to him and explained to him how it was working. And as you've seen with Picasso before, he loved different media and painting, drawing, graphics, prints, sculpture, everything he could touch, he loved it. And he was very interested. So he made, under the direction of Suzanne Hamier, he made a couple of plates and pots, and then left for over a year. And then a year later returned to see the result of what he had done and loved it. And he thought it was so great that he asked if he could do more. Sorry, this is allergies, don't worry. Nothing else. And so the Hamier put a whole space in their workshop dedicated to Picasso. He liked it so much that he decided to move to Vallauris. And for a few years, he lived in Vallauris, very close to the ceramic shop. Here is, so from 48 to 55, he lived there. This is him painting in the studio that was annexed to his little house in Vallauris. The afterwar was difficult for him. He had that ambiguous, how can I say, attitude during the war that made that some people were resenting the fact he had not had a clear response to the German. And so it was a moment of questioning for him. So ceramic provided him with a really interesting new medium. It also, we have to realize, with ceramics, he could reach a client base that he didn't have before, because this was much more approachable for people to buy than his paintings, that by that time the prices were going through the roof. And so, as you can see, he was painting them, using very often, as we'll see, the shape of the ceramic to the advantage of his design. Here again with Suzanne Hamier on the right, and with different things, paintings and ceramics. You know, if you've ever worked with clay, it's very tactile. And so it has that interesting side to art. Here is a series of objects. And as you know, these objects, that they are still made, by the way, after some of the patterns, they're numbered, have kept quite a high value. If ever you have one that is a real one, it has kept an extremely good value. But as I say, he was touching a layer of population that he couldn't reach before as customer base.
So Anne would
Yes.
paint in the original and then
Yes.
they would do additions of that
Exactly.
and make copies.
Exactly. He would do the original and then it would be copied. And you see, for example, here he really takes advantage of the roundness of the vessel to show off his bowl. In Valoris, there was an old chateau, and he's been asked to do something in the Romanesque chapel that they had. And there he made a statement really for war, you know, against war and for peace. And as you can see, you have the barrel vault of the chapel, and for him it was difficult. It's about 3 meters high, so about 9 feet high. But he painted these, and they join at the top, but face each other. So you have the one on the top there, which is on the left here, shows war with all its ugliness. And then down below, you have peace, where you have children playing with winged horses, people sitting down on the lawn and having a picnic, and the other children playing with other toys. And that's for him, that's the moment of peace. This is really what he was yielding at. He wanted peace by all means. And this is one of the drawings that he did on the same theme, War and Peace, very much inspired by Françoise Gillot still. Though she's almost on her way out, he still cared for her and for the children. It always had a very ambiguous, as you know, relationship with his women, very attracted at first, and then, of course, Françoise became a mom. 2 children, it takes a lot of time. And so he was not the center of the world anymore. And at that time, many men resent that moment. Together with ceramic, he also discovers a new medium. And we're talking about the lino cut. And lino cut is literally a block of linoleum that he uses as an engraving block. And he just traces on the linoleum cut and use that as a printing basis, and came out with that lino cut with very interesting and creative works. This is his picador. That's the man who is on the horse during the bullfights. Or in this case, the bust of a woman with a hat, also a lino cut. So in his sentimental life, really interesting, finally listening to what everybody has told her, Françoise decides to leave with her 2 children. And there she goes. And of course, Picasso, who can't stay very long without somebody else, gets another woman, and this is Jacqueline. Jacqueline Roque, R-O-Q-U-E, was working at the ceramic workshop in Valoris, and was very, very young. She was 27 when, I think more or less 27 when they got married. So very young, he was in his late 70s. And she's the perfect submissive woman as long as she lives with him. She was doing everything for him. And he's getting older, so he's not demanding for certain things, but more demanding for others. But so he had his crisis, he didn't want to see her, and then he wanted to see her, and she went through it. She left, she came back, and so on. So from literally 1953 on to his death in 73, Picasso is going to live with Jacqueline Roque, and it's going to be an interesting dynamic. When Françoise Gillot leaves in 53 with her 2 children, he spent at first the time as a bachelor, divided his time between Paris and his new beautiful villa near Cannes, La Californie. We'll see it in a minute. And as I said, met Jacqueline, she became his muse, so a lot. She's the one that he painted the most of all the women that he was with. And she started integrating her life in it. Here you can see she's teaching him dance positions, the 5th position in dance. And he was listening to her. Here it's with his dogs. He, as you know, he loved dogs and he always had dogs. And so he's eating in his plate. And Jacqueline, you can really see the evolution, went from the young girl that was not particularly fashionable or whatever, became really, he groomed her to become an elegant woman. As I say, he painted her multiple times. These are just a few examples of oil and charcoal, a portrait there on the left, and Jacqueline with flowers on the right. As you can see again, as I repeated all along this class, he uses different style just on a whim. He shows at that time some interest in the old masters. What fascinated him with Jacqueline is she looks very much like one of the figures of the Delacroix, the women of Algiers. And he thought, this thing is not working. This is why I'm not getting it. Let me see if I have a second one over here. So that's the time I didn't have. So sorry, I can't. I can show you. The one with the book looked very much like Jacqueline. So much so that he will tell her, say, Delacroix knew you already, because he really thought that it was the resemblance of Jacqueline. So he starts to reinterpret many of these, works, just different interpretations. So he's going to do dozens and dozens of these paintings, reinterpreting what Delacroix had done, but his way, of course. And he's going to do that with Aldorfer, Manet, Rembrandt, Delacroix, and Courbet. as you can see, very typical Picasso. And you can see even in his reinterpretation, he uses different styles. And this is a portrait of Jacqueline in Turkish costume. He, as you know, loved the Mediterranean, and so he wanted something really nice where he had space. He was tired of Paris because he was so easily recognizable. Everybody was following him on the street. So he had no intimacy, if you want, in Paris. So he decides to buy that very understated house, as you can see, beautiful house in Cannes, the Villa Californie. He bought it in 1955 and moved there with Jacqueline. He painted a lot while he was there, landscapes too, as well as these reinterpretations. But in 1961, they built a new building close by that concealed his view of the sea. And he was furious and decided to move to another place, and we'll see that one. His granddaughter, Marina Picasso, inherited California, finished restoring it in 1987. She renamed the villa as Pavillon de Flore. And then in 2015, put the house up for sale. And it went for a hefty price. Because the idea that Picasso owned it really plays a role. Now, I'm going to show you here, and hopefully it's going to work, an interesting little clip, which is called the Mystère Picasso. And hopefully, yeah, I'm not sure it's going to work there, but here it should. Yes, here too. Oh, come on, baby. Sorry, we're going to have a... I'm going to cut the sound here. So it's a movie made by a very famous Henri-Georges Clouzot, a very famous French cineast. So you can see him behind the camera. And they give Picasso a certain amount of time to do a work of art. So that's Picasso's voice. It's an idea of transformation. So you can see. So his fish becomes a rooster. And typically Picasso, he's there, the bare top. He hated clothes when he was in the South, so he would always be dressed that way, very casually. And Clouseau is cheating all the time, by the way. He's 75, by the way, at that time. Okay, so I have to see that one there. I'm sorry. No, it's okay. We'll go on. So you can look at on YouTube, you look at the Mystère Picasso, and you can see it again. Interesting the way he works, and to hear his voice in real is really fascinating to me. Come on. Can't get it to move further. Okay, there we are. So he goes on making pictures of Jacqueline. This is in 1957. But something is going to happen around that time. And what happens is in 1955, Olga dies. She dies quite suddenly. And so there she goes. Marie-Thérèse always remains in the background when he's really, now, once he lives in the South, he doesn't see her. But when he's in Paris, sometimes when he wants peace, he goes there. And Marie-Thérèse went on living her life for him. He kept sending her a check monthly until the early 60s, where suddenly he will stop. And that's going to be a drama because that's what she was living on. But he keeps a very, let's say, a closer relationship with the daughter, Maya. Maya, he really liked her. But everything is going to change once in 55, Olga dies, because Jacqueline is taking a bigger role. But on the other hand, what's happening is Françoise Gillot, who has remarried, has married a journalist who is also an artist, Luc Simon. And they have a good marriage. He takes very good care of the two children. But she keeps working on trying to get the two kids to have to bear the Picasso's name. And so she goes through lawyers and so on, and they seem to come to an agreement by the early 60s, where Picasso seems to agree through his lawyer to give his name to the two children. But at that time, the lawyer tells, you know, the easier way to do it would be that you marry Picasso. Now that Olga is gone, maybe you could marry Picasso. And Picasso plays a terrible game there. He pretends that he would agree with it. And at that time, she says, okay, I'm going to divorce Luc. And she starts the procedure of a divorce with Luc. At that time, and I don't know if it's, yeah. At that time, in a very secret ceremony in 61, just when she has started doing the procedure, with the procedure of divorce, he marries Jacqueline secretly. And so there goes, of course, the marriage. And Françoise is so angry. She decides to go on with the divorce with Luc, and she departs to the US with the two children. Jacqueline is going to play a very bad role at that time, because now she goes from victim to victor. She's the victor. She has the name of Picasso. She's the wife, the established wife. And she starts absolutely demolishing all the kids in the eyes of Picasso, and telling stories of drugs that were not true, a whole series of things. And so Picasso refuses to see the kids anymore. And that's really due to Jacqueline. So he goes on with the reinterpretation. This time is with the Las Meninas of Velázquez. He's going to do, I think, 30 different interpretations of Las Meninas. Here you can see. Even the little infanta Margarita. So his words, if someone want to copy Las Meninas entirely in good faith, for example, upon reaching a certain point, and if that one was me, I would say, what if you put them a little more to the right or left? I'll try to do it my way, forgetting about Velázquez. The test would surely bring me to modify or change the light because of having changed the position of a character. So little by little, that would be a detestable Meninas for a traditional painter, but it would be my Meninas. And that's very much his character. He wants to always change things, but it has to be his. He's a very, very possessive guy. So he made a series of 58 paintings, reinterpreted paintings of Las Meninas. Now, just to give you a smile, here are some version of emoji Meninas and the Simpson Meninas on the right. As you know, around that age, people are starting to die around him, and this time is the time of Matisse. He passes away after a long disease in 1954. And since the beginning, Matisse and Picasso were friends and foes, but towards the end of the life, Picasso would very often go and visit Matisse with Françoise Gillot. Matisse loved Françoise. He really liked her, sent her lots of very nice letters. And they would have these artist discussions, on the value of this and the value of that. And so when the phone rang to announce the death of Matisse, Picasso didn't even want to take the phone. But he stayed silent for 2 days. He just couldn't come with the idea that Matisse wasn't anymore. Here you can see his Chapelle du Rosaire in Vence, which is really known that he decorated, though Matisse was a total atheist, but he liked very much the sister Jacques Marie, who was a former model of his, very nice and very good person who turned into a sister after being a model for him. And he really liked her as a person very much. So for Picasso, that was one big loss. And as he mentioned at that time, now that Matisse is gone, Chagall is the only one who knows colors. Though he didn't care very much for Chagall, but he liked his colors. Here's some of the stained glass windows. Also, Matisse had given Picasso his doves. He had doves in his apartment. And so when he knew that he couldn't take care of them properly, he gave them to Picasso. And this is the only Matisse-like painting that Picasso ever painted. And here you have the studio with the pigeons, as Picasso called them, with a view on the Mediterranean. In 1958, he wanted to get away from the coast because, again, he just couldn't even walk on the street without being surrounded by people. He was so known. So they bought in the back country the Chateau de Vaugenargues that he inhabited for a brief period of time with Jacqueline from 1958 to his death in 73. This is where he's buried. And we'll explain why later on. But that place was enormous, and he couldn't fill it. It wasn't easily livable. And so they both very quickly hated the place and decided to find something else. He painted very little, just a few paintings like this one after Cranach, the portrait. And then, of course, as I mentioned, in 1961, in a very secret ceremony, he actually had even called Marie-Thérèse to see if she wanted to marry him, and she said no. But then he played games with Françoise, and this is after the marriage with Jacqueline that Françoise decides to write a book, and she starts writing the book, and that's going to absolutely make Picasso crazy. He does everything to prevent the publication of the book. He wants it destroyed. He has a lot of supporters. A lot of people consider that he's such a sacred monster that nobody should write anything against him. And so Françoise does it, and it is published. And of course, you can read. She's actually pretty fair. I think she doesn't dramatize the whole story, but she says the things the way they were. So Picasso is not happy. And of course, when Françoise left Picasso, it was, nobody leaves a man like me. You know, that was the first time that a woman would leave him. He would always throw them away. But for the first time, Françoise left, and with her 2 children. And it was, the marriage was so secret that Françoise only found out 2 weeks later in the newspaper, and she was stunned. She couldn't believe that he had played her that way. So at that time, as I said, he didn't like the castle. He wanted to find another place that was still away from the coast, so he wouldn't have too many tourists, but that was large enough to live very comfortably. And his real estate friend found him that absolutely superb place, the Mas de Notre-Dame de Vie. So Mas is a farm in Provençal, and Notre-Dame de Vie, or Lady of Life. It's a former convent that had been turned into a villa, had just been completely restored, and it's superb, as you can see, the beautiful vegetation of the south of France. And there he feels at home, and he loves the place. He has the whole lower level is his studio, and he can work the way he wants. He goes on with his reinterpretation. This time it's the Déjeuner sur l'herbe by Manet that he also is going to copy in multiple versions. But the deaths go on, and you have the death of Georges Braque in March 63, of Cocteau in October 63. And little by little, you know, his former world is just falling apart. And he feels for him who is scared to death of death. It's really terrible. Of course, by that time, his eyesight is failing, his hearing is failing. He's not allowed to smoke anymore, which he did, you know, he was living with his cigarette before. So for him, this is really hard. But in 1966, he also has a big surgery that's going to leave him a diminished man. He had a very secret surgery. They literally boarded the train in disguise, arrived in Paris, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, where he was registered as Mr. Ruiz, not Picasso, so nobody would know. He had the gallbladder removed and a procedure with the prostate that made him inoperative, if you can say. And so for him, that was terrible. It was the end of his malehood, and he couldn't cope with that. It had been driving him his entire life. And for him, this became an extremely painful thing. His black eyes that were known to be so electrical have faded to kind of almost light brown. So he didn't have that very electrical eyesight. He literally stopped painting for a year. And some people like Malraux, who was a minister in the French government at the time, would go and pay him a visit. And he said he was pretending to swim, but all he was doing is paddling in the pool. He was really diminishing rapidly. So the painting that you see, this is the only one that I'm showing you because his lack of sexual life made him completely obsessed on the subject. And for a few years, when he was still painting, he does things that are absolutely horrible and completely obsessive with sex. So not showable. But he is one of the last self-portrait that he shows here, the painter working. And as you can see, he's still showing his striped sweater that he absolutely loved to wear. But he shows himself with still dark hair when at that time he had very white hair. Malraux, who was a friend, decides he really wants to pay homage to Picasso and have a big retrospective on him. At first, Picasso refuses, but Jacqueline convinces him. And finally, he accepts. Picasso has to do nothing. He's going to lend works, but other works come from all over the world for that retrospective, where it's going to be more than 100 works of art are going to be shown with his work. And this is going to be in the Petit Palais in Paris. Even the Demoiselles d'Avignon come from MoMA, an incredible thing. He pretends that he doesn't care, but on the other hand, he's, I'm sure, very happy that his name is recognized so well, and he's considered as the artist of the century. So I'm not sure that's going to work, but I'm going to try to show you a little clip here, and we're going to see if it works. Yes, it looks like it might. It's going to be small, but gives you a little idea. I'm going to pass that one. Sorry for people online, but see, this is Valor. Up, it doesn't show the, sorry. Okay, so we'll pass. I'll give you the list. Sorry, this is not what I want you to see. Okay, there we are. Another of so the exhibition is a huge success, and people, most people just are very happy that Picasso is recognized that way. Another of the big negative moment in his life at the time, if you remember his beautiful studio that he had in the Rue des Grands Augustins, where he painted Guernica, it was still his. But there is a law in Paris that if you don't occupy a building for a certain number of months or a year, it's taken from you. And he hadn't been in the studio for something like 6 or 7 years. And so suddenly there is a placard on the door, and that says that he's expelled, and he has to, in a hurry, send people to make the inventory of all the things that are in it and take it out so that they can take possession of the studio. And it makes him absolutely mad. He said, this was the last of the memories I had in Paris. I spent so much time there during the war. Everybody was with him there. So all the traces of the half century I spent in Paris are now totally and definitely erased. It's quite interesting because with the contacts he had in very high government, including Malraux had agreed not to do it, but it's the bureaucracy that went on and decided the thing, and so that it was a total defeat, unfortunately, for him. So this is a view of his studio in the beautiful Ma, the Notre-Dame de Vie. Picasso's health declined on and on. He spent a lot of time in bed. He was very irascible. He was just had terrible episodes of anger and very positive and then immediately negative episodes with even very close friends. For example, they had a couple that was very close to him, but the only couple that was still visiting him because he didn't want to see anybody else. And he had told the woman, say, go and get your camera so you can film this and this and this. She comes with the camera, she starts filming, and he says, what are you doing there? I didn't give you the permission to do it. And he went after her. She was so angry. She opened the camera, removed the film itself, and threw it in his face and left. And he spent literally a week on the phone with her to try for her to come back and to forgive him for what he had done. He said, but I did nothing. I did nothing. So he had these very childlike reactions, very capricious. So very difficult. And Jacqueline was always in the background, trying to please him, but also hanging up at him. She could not believe, she couldn't leave him. And so they'd become a dependence, an interdependence between the two of them. She couldn't leave the place without him crying for her. And but his health degraded. He had all kind of ailments, including smoking, of course, caused edema in the lungs. And he actually died on the 8th of April 1973 from pulmonary edema and a heart attack. And it was, there is in the book by Ariana Huffington quite a description of his last hours, where Jacqueline had called the doctor and he was there really gasping for air, and she didn't want to let him go. And so even when he finally had died, somebody coughed and she thought it was him. You see, you have to help him. You have to give him a shot. He can't leave. You can't leave me that way. You can't leave me that way. So it was really an awful moment. When came the time to bury him, the mayor of Mougins, where the Mar was, refused to have Picasso buried in Mougins because he thought he was a bad communist guy. He didn't want to have him there and probably didn't want the publicity around his tomb that would have drawn a lot of people to come and pay homage to him. So they finally decided to bury him in the chateau, on the chateau land itself. And so he was buried there 2 days later, with at the decision of Jacqueline and his son Paulo, who was still alive at that time. But everybody else was forbidden to be there. So all his children tried to come in to be there for and she refused. They were ringing the bell, no, nobody can come in. And so there was also the decision to put this sculpture on the tomb, which Jacqueline didn't know that was actually Marie-Thérèse, a statue of Marie-Thérèse, herself being a symbol for Conchita, the little sister of Picasso. And so there is a plot there. So Picasso is buried there with that very large bronze statue on top of it. But nobody has ever been able to go on the tomb because she completely forbade anybody to come in. Even the people from Malaga, the news traveled very quickly on Sunday, 8th of April, that Picasso had died. And some people from Malaga, where he was born, came immediately by car with these flowers to be put on them. And she refused the entrance to these people too, but she accepted the flowers. And so that was the only thing that was offered, that was accepted on his tomb. Even Sabartes, his great friend for a long time, wasn't authorized to come in. No, the big problem with Picasso's death was that he left no will. And you can imagine not only the estate, but the quantity of art that was there. And so he literally said, when I die, it will be a shipwreck. And as when a huge ship sinks, many people all around will be sucked down with it. So that was his terms, and he knew he was going to leave a battle, and he did it willfully. It's very deliberately. That shows you his character, just enjoying, even in death, the idea that he was going to make a mess of things. So let's look down, and it was, a lot of people have tried to analyze why he did it. A lot of it was question of superstition. For him, and I know many people for who is the same, don't want to make a will, because if you make a will, you're going to die. As we know, we're going to die anyway, but at least you die in peace. So just a little recap of Picasso in his life. He married Olga Koklova in 1919, and with her had a son that you can see next to her, Paulo. Paulo married Emilienne and had two children, Pablito, who actually, because he was prevented to attend the funeral of his grandfather, drank a whole bottle of chlorine and died a month later. So Pablito, that you see there with the beard, died a month after his grandfather did. But Paulo also married with Emilienne, also had Marina, and she's still alive and very active in, not directly with the works of art, with the inheritance that she got. She's taking care of poor children and so on in third world country. Just to make a quick resume, there's been lawsuit, it's still going on, by the way, lawsuits by all his children for the inheritance. And finally, it was agreed that the kids of survivors were going to have about the same part of the inheritance. So when Paulo, who was the only legitimate heir, by the way, married the second time Christine, he had Bernard, and Bernard has been very instrumental in taking care of the artwork, the copyrights. They are extremely severe about it, very drastic about the copyright, yeah, that's for Bernard. So the second one is, of course, Marie-Thérèse, who had a daughter, Maya, who was close to her grandfather until Jacqueline really badmouthed her. She married Pierre Widmeyer and had 3 children with him, Olivier, who was born in 61, Richard in 66, who is probably the one who is the less involved with the works, and Diana, who is an art historian and taking care of a lot of the publication on the father. And Maya, by the way, died last year, a little over 2 years ago now. She was extremely instrumental too in the memory of her father. Then Françoise Gillot, who had Claude, who died last year, and Paloma, who is still alive and very active. And you must know about Paloma because she was she did a lot of fashion and jewelry design. Françoise Gillot married Luc Simon, divorced in 62. And had Aurelia with Luc Simon. And then she married Jonas Salk, who is the famous scientist who did the polio vaccine, and stayed with him until he died in 95. And as you know, François Gillot died last year at the age of 101. was a painter quite known in the US. And then finally, Jacqueline Roch, who was married prior to Picasso, divorced obviously when she knew Picasso, had a daughter with her husband, Catherine. And Catherine inherited the whole heritage of her mother. The point that I forgot to say, Marie-Thérèse Walter, 3 years after Picasso's death, committed suicide. She hung herself in the garage. Couldn't live without Picasso's image. Jacqueline Roch, in 86, so it's 13 years after Picasso's death, shot herself in her bed, and again could not conceive life going on without Picasso. And so he left a really strange airs, if you want, a kind of a smell of death that followed him. And it's very much, it's such a shame. But when you look at his life really in detail, you find all these contradictions and a lot of negative thought if it wasn't revolving around him. So just a few recap of his life through his self-portrait. 1896, he's still in Spain. 1900, he made this self-portrait just coming to Paris for the first time for the World Exhibition. Your Picasso in 1901, where he starts having a feeling that he's somebody. 1901, he loses his friend Casagemas, and this is the beginning of the Blue period. 1906, he's starting to move really away from traditional art. He has been back to Barcelona a little bit, influenced by Romanesque art and early manuscripts. This is equivalent period to the portrait of Gertrude Stein. 1907 is the beginning of Cubism. And then 1937, 1964, you can see him really getting older, but his striped sweater. And 70 and 71, he's a very aged and angry man. And this is unfortunately a summary of his life. And you can judge that the way you want, but it's the end. Let me just stop the recording.